Today on How It's Made. Canvas wall tents. Exactly what you need when life is a walk in the park. Peace pipes. For those times when sorry just isn't enough. Shredded wheat cereal. We go to the factory where your big breakfast is made. And cannons. That's our last report, so you could say we'll be going out with a bang. But first, a wall tent is shaped like a cabin. It's tall enough and wide enough to stand up in and walk around. This type of tent is typically used as a base camp on more demanding trips. Unlike a smaller camping tent, it can accommodate a lot of your creature comforts, making it a canvas home from home. These wall tents are made of sturdy canvas. They have a zip-up screen over the doorway and windows to keep out the insects. They also have a vent hole in the roof to accommodate a real stove. They can be made with lightweight canvas, making it easier to transport on trips. Depending on the number of tent orders to be filled, the factory's fabric cutter layers up to 10 sheets of canvas on the cutting table. Following a pattern, he draws guidelines, then aligns them one at a time on a track along which the cutting knife rides. Once he's cut all the canvas pieces for one tent, he hands them over to a sewing machinist. She overlaps adjoining pieces and, using a double needle sewing machine, binds them with 2 parallel lines of stitching. This produces a durable weather-resistant seam. The stove ventilation system is next. She sews what they call a stovepipe shield to the roof, then cuts away the canvas underneath. The shield is a fiberglass fabric rectangle with a silicon ring in the centre, through which you push the stovepipe. After neatly finishing the edges, she attaches a canvas flap that zips shut to close off the stovepipe shield, and rolls up and ties to open it. She also sews a canvas weather flap which closes over the tent's front door, extra protection in bad weather. She sews a row of D-rings to the edge of one flap, then sews hooks to the corresponding door flap. They're both made of stainless steel, which never rusts, even with repeated exposure to moisture. These sturdy hooks and rings will keep the flaps securely closed in windy weather. The cutter, meanwhile, traces templates on heavy-duty fiberglass screen, then cuts the screens for the tent's rear and side window. The sewer stitches webbing to the window's perimeter. It's a cotton seal, which keeps out rain, snow and wind. Meanwhile, the zip is sewn to the door screen. She also sews seatbelt material inside the roof hem. Then, pairs of grommets roughly 1 metre apart are placed alongside this reinforced perimeter. Once you've pitched your tent, you can secure it by looping ropes through these grommets and tying them to pegs in the ground. The tent floor is made of vinyl, and the floor pieces are joined using a radio frequency welder. It emits radio waves which melt the material, fusing the overlapping edges into a seam. The internal frame is made from heavy-duty galvanized steel tubing. They're connected with stainless steel couplers. In quality control, they assemble the tent before sending it out. After laying out the couplers, they insert the frame pieces to form the roof, fit the tent fabric over the roof framework, and insert the legs to prop up the structure. Then they pull down the walls. After tying back the flaps, they lay down the floor, which simply snaps into place. If you're 2 people who get along, the entire setup takes about 10 minutes. Then it's just a matter of installing the wood or coal-burning stove. Once that's done, it's a nice cup of cocoa, then off to bed. After a round of ging-gang-gooly-gooly watcher, round the fire that is. Long-stemmed with an elaborately carved stone bowl, this is a native North American pipe. Historically, it was reserved for special occasions, such as the signing of peace treaties, which is why European settlers called it the peace pipe. Native legend has it that the mystical buffalo calf woman gave native people the first sacred pipe. It's believed to have spiritual powers. The wisps of smoke from the stone bowl are seen as prayers rising to the Creator. The pipe maker starts with wood like ash or sumac. These species are soft at the core, so they can easily be hollowed out with the red-hot tip of a thin piece of metal. He plunges the smoking hot wire into the soft core of the wood, and it quickly burns through, creating the passageway through which tobacco smoke can be drawn. Now with a plane, he shaves off the tree bark and shapes the outside of the wood, creating a smooth, slim stem. For effect, he carves decorative angled swirls into the wood with a rasp. He then whittles one end of the stem to transform it for attaching the pipe bowl. He now confirms the diameter is right by checking it against the template. Sanding is now required between the swirls to smooth away gouges left by the rasp. He files a notch into the stem just below the swirls. The beading artist wraps fringed leather around the notch and places a brightly coloured accent piece on top. She strings glass beads around the leather-wrapped notch, working with a pattern and colour scheme in mind. Years ago, Native Americans obtained beads through trade with European settlers and threaded them onto pieces of animal sinew using a needle made of bone. The colours of these beads can really make a statement. A string of red might signify vibrancy and long life, while mixing colours could represent a spiritual burst of energy. The pipe stem is now complete and ready for the stone bowl. For that they mine red clay rock, called pipestone. Pipestone is soft, and this means it's easy to carve. It's also smooth and takes a high polish. He splashes water onto a chunk to make any flaws more apparent as he evaluates it for carving. With his selection made, he now begins to trace a basic template of a pipe bowl onto the chunk. He saws through the stone along the penciled lines, using just a hacksaw. The rock is fairly easy to cut. It's essentially compressed clay. Now nicely contoured, the stone is really starting to look like a pipe bowl. With a series of finer tools, he flattens one end and then sculpts the shape of an eagle head onto it. He wields a rotary tool with a fine bit to carve eyes and feathers. Traditionally, natives use sharp flint or bone to engrave details. He now drills into the stone to hollow out the shank and the actual tobacco bowl. For early natives, this job was very labour-intensive. They gouged out the stone with an arrowhead attached to a stick. He rinses the eagle pipe bowl and then sands it while wet for an even smoother finish. He uses a blowtorch to heat the stone. Once hot, it readily absorbs beeswax as he rubs it into the pores. Beeswax gives the pipestone bowl a nice satin sheen. After a dip in cool water to solidify the wax, he scratches away some of it along the detail work, including the eyes and feathers. This adds definition and contrast. After a bit of tinkering, the wooden pipe stem fits snugly into the stone shank. He peers down the pipe to confirm that the stem is perfectly aligned with the bowl. This sacred pipe is now ready for any special occasion. They've used a combination of traditional techniques and modern power tools to produce this pipe, reconciling the ancient and new in perfect harmony. I'll smoke to that. Coming up next, if you've got a short fuse, then you'll love our report on cannons. We found a foundry where they're made. Then we're off to watch our favourite cereal being made. No, it's not a tour of the set of how it's made. We're going to the factory where they make shredded wheat. See you after the break. Shredded wheat is a breakfast cereal made of 100% whole wheat that's shredded, cooked and then shaped. It was invented by an American businessman in 1893 when he met a man who was eating boiled wheat with cream to aid digestion. They may look like tiny bales of hay, but they are actually a nutritious breakfast or snack. Shredded wheat is the first mass-produced ready-to-eat cereal, invented at a time when people typically ate a cooked breakfast. It all begins with whole grain wheat. The raw kernels are rock hard, so to soften them up, the factory cooks them simultaneously in water and with steam for about 30 minutes. As the wheat leaves the cooker, its moisture content is about 50%, and excess water drains through holes in the conveyor belt. The wheat then travels through a dryer, which blasts the soggy kernels with hot air. By the time the wheat exits 10 minutes later, the kernels are dried. They drop onto a conveyor belt, and then they head to the part of the operation that puts the shredded into shredded wheat. The wheat goes into several fill tubes. Each fill tube drops kernels in between two rollers which apply pressure, shredding the kernels into delicate strands. The strands drop onto the conveyor belt below, forming a fairly even layer. Each pair of shredding rollers deposits another layer of strands on top of the previous one, until there's a specific number of stacked layers. The company won't reveal how many. Nor will it let us film the next machine, a specially designed cutter which divides the sheets of layered wheat strands into rectangular biscuits. The sheet of shredded wheat biscuits now travels through a tunnel oven for approximately 10 minutes. The specifics of what goes on inside the oven is another secret. All the company will reveal is that there are two cycles, baking and toasting. As you can see in this before and after comparison, the bake cycle makes the biscuits crisp, but it's the toast cycle that lightly browns them. The next machine compresses the sheets with a belt, which breaks apart the individual biscuits. Typically, shredded wheat comes in two varieties, plain and frosted. At this point, the plain ones would normally proceed to packaging. However, this batch is designated for frosting, so the conveyor moves them along to the coating station. To make the frosting, they blend and heat sugar, water, and other ingredients. Overhead nozzles spray it onto the passing biscuits. The frosting takes about a minute to dry and set. Here's the before and after comparison. Normal shredded wheat, then frosted. On the packaging line, an automated machine forms a bag out of a continuous sheet of plastic film, fills it with a weighed out portion of shredded wheat, then seals the bag and cuts it free. The next station inserts the bag into a cardboard cereal box, printing the best before date on the top flap. The box also lists the cereal's nutritional benefits, high in fibre and low in fat and sodium. A perfect start to the day, especially with nice hot milk. Cannons are back on the battlefield, as history buffs reenact war scenes from their favourite disputes. The fighting isn't real, of course, but these replica cannons aren't fake either. They can do everything the originals could do. So let's light the fuse, stand back, and see how they're made. On the front line of any war reenactment, you'll find the big guns, the cannons. Built to various scales with all the original details, these replicas have real firepower. For safety reasons, they don't load actual cannonballs into the muzzles, just black powder. It's traditionally been used to shoot cannonballs, but even on its own, it still makes firing a cannon a real blast. Production starts with wooden moulding boxes that have a cannon shape inside. There's a top half and a bottom one. Together, they're known as the pattern. They fill each box with lake sand that's been laced with bonding chemicals. The sand is soft and warm at this point. They pack it down and level it off. As the sand cools, the bonding agents cause the sand to solidify. This sand mould will be used for casting the cannon. While the other half is completed, they brush an alcohol-based wash into all the crevices of the first sand mould. But they don't just leave it to dry. Instead, they ignite it. The fire burns off the alcohol, leaving a protective skin on the mould that will prevent seepage of the molten casting material into the sand. Glue is then run around the border of the cannon mould. The other half of the mould has now taken shape and goes through the same alcohol wash process. Using a crane, the team carefully aligns the two sand moulds. The glue cures and the mould is ready to receive the casting material, iron. Molten iron is poured into a large ladle. Then they transfer the fiery liquid to the sand mould and pour it inside. The iron cools in the mould for about 6 hours, and then the liquid metal solidifies. Then it's into a shot blast chamber, so named because there's steel shot inside. Tiny pellets inside the chamber bombard the sand mould and break it up. A vacuum sucks the sand and steel shot out of the chamber, leaving the solid cast iron cannon. A worker slices off unwanted gating, which was formed as the iron flowed into the mould. One section served as a reservoir to compensate for shrinkage as the iron solidified. That too is removed. He then grinds the casting seam until smooth. At the finishing factory, a lubricating mix of water and oil flows from a drill bit as it bores into the centre of the solid cannon casting. The operator switches bits twice for a gradual widening of the cavity, taking it to a precise dimension. Here's a peek down the cannon's newly bored muzzle. With the nose of the muzzle now protected by plastic, he pours an epoxy adhesive into the barrel. He then inserts a steel liner. The liner is a modification to the original design, a safeguard that will help the cannon better withstand the pressure of ignition. The cannon turns on a lathe, and this action drives the steel liner completely down the barrel. It also spreads the epoxy evenly for a good seal. A carbide bit moves down the spinning cannon to taper the exterior. He grinds the area between the trunnions, protrusions that fit into the corresponding grooves on the gun carriage. He stamps the maker's mark into the metal, and then sprays solvent-based primer onto the entire cannon, followed by 3 coats of black paint. From start to finish, it's taken about 8 days to produce this full-scale replica. It's now ready for a test fire. Cover your ears. There, a blast from the past brought bang up to date.